The impudence, the audacity, the unmitigated gall of those Knuckleheads of Liberty podcasters, daring to voice opinions outside the mainstream of accepted thought. Listen if you dare. It's angry, it's funny, it's even sometimes sad, but it's always based on freedom and justice, as you will see. Here's our host, Jason McPhee.
Welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty. We're coming at you on November 30th, 2022, just about a week after Thanksgiving. And we are thankful to have a break from just the depressing politics that we seem to always be living through. We're actually going to be interviewing Eric Kohn, and he is the Director of Marketing and Communications for the Acton Institute. And so we're going to hear a little bit about their mission on Liberty. Before that, let me introduce you to our panel. In our upper left-hand corner, we have Leon, the word Brathwaite, last word in Liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California. And my right-hand corner, we have our special guest today, Eric Kohn, who I just introduced. He's the Director of Marketing and Communications at the Acton Institute. And no Tim today. He's out, so no Screaming Eagle. And my name is Jason McPhee, and I'll be your host today. So let's jump right into it. The Acton Institute, it's kind of a interesting organization. They're very market oriented, but they also have a high emphasis on faith as well. And so they kind of tie those two things together. And so to hear a little more about that, Eric, can you tell us a little bit more about how your organization began and what you guys are all about?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on. So Acton Institute was founded in 1990 by a Catholic priest and a Catholic layman, Father Robert Sirico and Chris Maurin. The intention of the Institute is to explore the connection between faith and virtue. Of course, it's named after Lord Acton, which, if anybody knows Lord Acton, they probably know him for his most famous quote that power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. He's a great historian and really did explore these ideas of freedom and virtue. We need a virtuous society to really support the kinds of acting and human freedom that we would like to see. So we study that nexus between the two of them. We look at the connection of good intentions with sound economics. Often say to our friends who have a more government-oriented or state-oriented approach to trying to solve problems that we agree with their ends. We want to get to the same kind of places that they want to get to. We want to alleviate poverty. We want a greater sense of justice in this world. We just think that the means that we have of getting there are far more effective. And I think the 32, now almost 33 years that Acton has been around, when you look around the world and you see the number of people who've been lifted out of poverty by the expansion of opening up of markets, the expansion of trade around the world, I think it's a real testament to that vision that markets are a much more effective way of solving those problems. So we work to promote a free and virtuous society characterized by individual liberty and sustained by religious principles.
So I guess you guys would say that good intentions are not good enough.
Good intentions are not good enough. You need to have results. I mean, we do want people to have good intentions, and I think we often, you mentioned our somewhat dour politics today, assume that people who disagree with us are ill-intended. There are some of those people out there, to be sure, but for the most part, people have good intentions. They think they're trying to do good in the world. The question is, what is actually effective and what actually works?
James, I was wondering, can you pull up the image? James, our invisible hand behind the scene here today. So, so this is the website for the Acton Institute. So I just wanted people to be able to see it and, know that it's out there, and they can certainly find out a lot more exploring through that. So maybe while we're talking, I can, I might explore a little during the conversation. But what are some of the activities that you guys do there at Acton to promote liberty? Because I know that one of the areas I connected with you guys is that you guys produced a film called The Hong Konger, which I thought was really fascinating and really dove into some of the struggles that are going on right now for liberty in Hong Kong.
We do a lot. We have a lot of in-person conferences throughout the year. Our biggest one is Acton University, which is here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in June of every year. It's a 3.5-day conference that explores all of that subject matter that I was talking about earlier, the nexus of faith, virtue, and human freedom. We do conferences all around the country and some in other countries as well. We publish a peer-reviewed journal, the Journal of Markets and Morality. We publish a quarterly magazine, Religion and Liberty. We publish web content on pretty much a daily basis. We produce 3 podcasts a week: Acton Unwind, which is our roundtable discussion podcast; Acton Line, which is an interview podcast; and Acton Vault, which really takes a lot of the events and programming that we've had over 32 years of history and helps to expose people to that all over again. So those are some of the things that we do. We also do make feature films. The one that we're probably most known for is Poverty Inc., which came out about 8 years ago now and explores the structure of international aid and relief for poverty in a way that, like we were talking about earlier, people have good intentions, but you don't realize when you buy shoes from one of those companies that says they're going to send a pair of shoes to Africa for every one that you buy. What you're doing there is you're crowding out the local cobbler, the person who has a business who is making shoes there, because you're flooding the market with free product and driving them out of business. So it was a film that explored that international aid and relief system and structure to ask, who is it really benefiting? And then you mentioned our most recent feature film, The Hong Konger, Jimmy Lai's Extraordinary Struggle for Freedom, which is about Jimmy Lai. If people aren't familiar with him, he's a billionaire businessman. He was a publisher of a newspaper called Apple Daily in Hong Kong, which was shut down last year by the Chinese Communist Party. He's currently in prison and awaiting trial that is supposed to start tomorrow, December 1st, for violations of Hong Kong's so-called national security law, which, for people who are interested in international rule of law concerns, this law really is an abomination. It applies retroactively. It's incredibly broadly written. It applies extra-nationally. So, as one of the people in our film, Benedict Rogers, who runs Hong Kong Watch in the United Kingdom, points out, every day, sitting in London criticizing what is going on in Hong Kong, he is in daily violation of Hong Kong's national security law, even though he is not a citizen of Hong Kong. He does not reside in Hong Kong. He is not subject to the legal jurisdiction of Hong Kong. And I don't know how many times I saw the film before it finally dawned on me that, I'm an associate producer of this film. Jason, we met in Sacramento as we were taking this film around the country. I've taken it to other countries as well to show it to people and do Q&A with the audiences. And it dawned on me fairly early on in that tour that I'm also in daily violation of Hong Kong's national security law, which, if I'm being honest, is somewhat of a point of pride to be in violation of a ridiculous abomination to the concept of rule of law like that. But Jimmy's trial is supposed to start soon. Might end up getting delayed. We can get in more of that if you'd like to, but I encourage people to check it out at thehongkongermovie.com. You can find the trailer there. Hopefully it will be available for streaming very soon.
Eric, since the Chinese government have taken over Hong Kong in 1997, we have seen a lot of changes have come to Hong Kong. But I'm wondering if during the life of your institute, if you are not seeing some totalitarian changes occurring here in the United States, in particular things like cancel culture and things like those sort of things that are really affecting free speech and assembly and all these other things. What are you seeing any of that? Are your people seeing any of that here in the United States?
Yeah, I think there are certainly things that are going on culturally in the United States that are of great concern. I take care to make this point when I've been taking this film around, that if we're making comparisons between the United States and, say, Hong Kong, we are talking about differences in both degree and in kind. I'm concerned about cancel culture as well. I'm concerned about not just the way that the political left views freedom of speech, but the way that the right increasingly views freedom of speech. I think all of these things are concerning. I think we have a lot of systemic problems and a lot of cultural problems. We have institutions that are failing us. They're not functioning the way that they are supposed to. Institutions are supposed to exist to accomplish something, and largely now exist for people to stand on top of them and use them for their own personal benefit. And I think to the detriment of the causes that those institutions are supposed to advance. So yeah, there are a lot of problems that currently exist, but the kind of deprivations of freedom that we are seeing in places like Hong Kong, places like Russia, places like Iran, where we are starting to see people pushing back and protesting against it. Those are differences in both degree and in kind that I think we should acknowledge, that despite all of those, the litany of things that you had hinted at and that I just talked about here in the United States, we still have it pretty good.
Yeah, fair point. That's a fair point. So does the Acton Institute get involved in politics at any level? I mean, whether it's involved in campaigns or anything like
Nope.
that, or that kind of stuff. Do you guys get involved? Do you all
No,
endorse candidates or anything like that?
We're a nonprofit organization. We are nonpartisan. We don't take sides in political battles. We don't promote legislation. We promote ideas. And if political actors are influenced by those ideas and wish to incorporate it in the things that they do, the legislation that they offer, the way that they talk about the problems that exist in this world and the ways they would like to address those problems, certainly we're heartened by that, but that is not our objective.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. You know, it is interesting too that you guys, I guess, you guys stress on your website this focal point that between markets and morality. And, you know, it's one of those things I think so many people miss. I think people, especially who favor government solutions to everything, I think they don't understand that there's actual moral action that happens within a market. This because specifically because it's voluntary, right? And I think as libertarians, that's sort of always a challenge to try to, you know, for us, we're at least I'm a libertarian. I know Leon's sort of a conservative libertarian mix, but we're sort of liberty-minded people. But we're trying to, you know, always have to tell people that, you know, that there's a certain morality in a market that occurs when if I want something from you, I have to do something for you in order to have that exchange happening. And most people seem to miss that. And so are there certain challenges you guys see in getting across these messages to people about markets and morality?
Sure. I mean, there are plenty of misunderstandings. I mean, I like to describe profit in the system of profit and loss that we have. Profit is a signal that we're serving well the interests of people whom we do not know. We're not forcing anyone to give you that dollar in exchange for that cup of coffee, right? People are getting it. This is where you get the double thank you phenomenon, right? You go and you get a cup of coffee and they hand you the coffee and you say thank you, and you hand them the money and they say thank you. You were both benefiting from that transaction. The point that you made about virtue undergirding markets, everybody knows the father of modern free market economics is Adam Smith. Everybody knows the wealth of not everybody, but people who are interested in the kind of nerdy stuff. As I always like to remind our interns every summer that we're weird. The fact that you're sitting in this conference room listening to me, you know, talk about the marketing approach that we have to telling people about the ideas that we promote means you're kind of weird. But for people who are into that kind of stuff, you're familiar with The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith's great book from the 1700s. People forget that the book that came before that, which is, I think, just as important, if not more important, is The Theory of Moral Sentiments. And that very much influenced the work that Adam Smith did later in his life. This idea of having a sense of virtue undergirding the market action that takes place. The markets have the ability to punish bad actors as well, but we would like to deal with virtuous people in the marketplace. And there's a reward, I think, for doing so. If you look at like Max Weber and the Protestant work ethic, I think this is another great example of it, right? This was not developed out of a sense of, if you do this, you will get rich, right? You will do well financially, economically. It was this is how you get into heaven. It turned out to have these knock-on benefits of creating wealth, of really benefiting society as well. So I think this is an example of you seeing people doing things for the right reasons, engaging in that kind of market structure. You see the benefits that it has for not only themselves, but for other people as well.
Do you believe that liberty is the desire for liberty, I should say, is a natural human condition?
I think it is a human yearning. And there's certainly plenty of cases throughout all of history that people have been deprived of that liberty.
Yes.
What forms those things take, I think these are some of the lessons that particularly those of us in the United States have learned the hard way over the last 20 years, that the way individual liberty, freedom will manifest itself in different places around the world in the context of different cultures is going to look different than it does, say, in the United States. I think this is one of the lessons we learned with Iraq and Afghanistan. We look at Iraq now, it is a freer country than it was before, but it's still markedly different from the way the United States is. And even Canada is different from the way the United States is. This is one of the reasons why it's really great to be able to travel internationally. I think a lot of Americans don't recognize that we have a culture in a way fish don't know they're wet. Go to another country and you realize Americans very much do have a culture. And it is generally a liberty-oriented culture still. But I think there is that yearning within the human soul to be able to be citizens, not subjects of whatever state it is that they're living in.
And that's a very good point. That's a very good point. So it raises another question. If it is the natural condition or desire for liberty, and I believe it is the natural condition of the human soul, the human spirit, however you want to articulate that, why it is so easily corrupted, though? I mean, wherever we have gone throughout the human history, we have seen that desire being corrupted by governments, I would say, for the most part, or some government-like entity. So which raises the question, why is it so easily corrupted? I think there's a lot of corruption of that ongoing right here in the United States. Why is that desire so easily corrupted?
I will go back to Lord Acton again. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I do always want to make the point when I use that quote, though, that people misunderstand it. Acton is not really necessarily talking about people who hold and wield power in there, although he certainly did believe that. The context which that quote comes from is from correspondence he had with a historian of the papacy by the name of Crichton, who was asking Acton, should we make allowances for, as the Catholics would say, the bad popes? Saying like they had really tough decisions to make. We should understand them within the context of the time that they lived in and the decisions that they were having to make, which were really, really hard. And Acton's response basically is, no, we should not. We should not hold people in power to a different standard than we would our brother or our neighbor or our children. And his point about power tending to corrupt is not really necessarily about those holding power. It's about those doing what Crichton was doing, surrounding those with power and making excuses for us. So I think that drive for that is also, I think, exists within humanity for power and control is a corrupting force. And on the other side of it, it's, I think, very easy to look at it. Living with freedom is hard. It necessitates accepting responsibility, consequences for one's actions. And in that sense, I think for people, there are some people who are just inclined to feel that it's just easier to be ruled than it is to rule yourself, to be told what to do rather than to have to tell yourself what to do. And it makes it possible to give in to those inclinations to just say, let somebody else take responsibility for it. Can't somebody else do it? It's a challenge, and is one of the reasons why we think a sense of virtue is incredibly important. With acting with a sense of virtue makes it easier to maintain, still difficult and challenging, but easier to maintain that sense of freedom within a society like ours.
One of the things I was, struck me a little bit earlier while you were talking as well was the, we tend to focus on the leaders, I think, almost too much because, in the end, their power ultimately comes from all those people underneath. And I guess the way they're able to believe in whatever the system is. And I think this is why it's so important to reach people with economics, because when you said that, we're very much a liberty culture, and I think most people think of themselves as having freedom, but they're always looking at somebody else and thinking, I'm not so sure if I approve of what that other guy's doing, right? And I think that's where, some of the corruption comes into play, and it's not necessarily always top down. It's maybe top down responding to, or the leaders responding to what the people ultimately are, kind of, if they're sort of grouping together and saying, we want this at the expense of someone else, maybe, I guess ultimately, I think if we want to fix these, maybe that message of reaching people with economic understandings of markets is a huge part of the key, I guess, in all this. So
I think it's a big part of it, and this is where I think the Acton Institute is unique in our emphasis on the complementary part of virtue and all of that. Use free speech as an example. Free speech in the abstract, generally pretty popular with people. Free speech, when you get specific about the things that both a legal structure around freedom of speech and a culture of freedom of speech need to protect, gets a lot less popular when you see people saying things that you find to be disgusting. I don't know if either of you have read The Righteous Mind, Jonathan Haidt's book from, I think, about 8 or 9 years ago. But some of the centers of our brains that process that kind of stuff are also very similar to the centers that process feelings like disgust. And we have those reactions. It's kind of the same center of our brain that has a sense of desire for cleanliness. We see things that disgust us, and we want them to be cleaner, which is why I think imparting a sense of virtue, which I do believe includes a sense in a society like ours of political toleration, not acceptance, but toleration for things that we don't like. Which is, to get specific about the United States, is one of the reasons why, I'm who's got two thumbs and loves federalism. This guy. I remember after the 2016 election having a argument with somebody about this. There's this nascent little movement for California should secede from the Union, and I made the point that maybe that wouldn't be necessary if California were more empowered to live like California wants to live, and Texas can live like Texas, and Illinois and Oklahoma and all of that. And the response I got was, oh, so you're talking about states' rights? That's got a great history. My response is, you're literally talking about secession. That does not have a great history either. But if we let people in their own communities and their own states live the way that they want to live, I think it would go a long way to helping us have a more peaceful society that gets along a lot better between the states and amongst the whole body politic.
You know what's funny about that too? That they were calling it Cal exit, and it really was starting to gain some ground when Trump got elected. But it's funny though, because there's a bunch of people in California who also would love to split the state apart into multiple states, and just so they can sort of get away, because there's parts of the northern, less populous parts of the state that just really don't think the same as the people in the big cities. And
I'm from Southern Illinois, and I lived in Chicago for about 15 years, and the same kind of rift exists between the Chicagoland area and Southern Illinois. And those are difficult problems, and within individual states, kind of hard to say what to do there. But at minimum, this is also one of the reasons I'm actually encouraged is we hear all of this stuff about we have this cold civil war that's going on in this country, and the fear that it's going to bubble up into something greater. And I look around and I see people aren't even really willing to move, right? They stay generally in the areas that they are. So they're not willing to move, but there are people suggesting they're going to start taking up arms against their fellow citizens all of a sudden, which is why I think the rhetoric is so much more overheated than people's actual sentiments actually are about most of this stuff.
Well, we have
but
seen...
we are...
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, Jason, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, we have seen a little bit of the Cal exiting and New York
exiting,
because we've actually lost, I think, at least one representative in this last census.
Illinois
count.
too, yeah.
But one thing I didn't want is we're starting to get near the end. I wanted to ask you a question we like to ask all of our guests, because it's not intuitive, these ideas of liberty. Most kids, they're raised through K through 12 government education. They tend to think of most solutions then need to be government solutions. And so it's not intuitive necessarily how we come to these ideas of liberty. What rang your liberty bell? Was it something that you always had or something that you picked up later in life?
I think it was initially instinctual. I got interested in the world and interested in political life as I was in college when 9/11 happened, and kind of looked around and thought there are some things going on in this world I should probably be paying attention to. But what really shifted it for me was a few years after that, when somebody gave me a copy of Milton Friedman's Free to Choose TV series. And
Yes.
that, like, I went down a big Milton Friedman rabbit hole, and I had the joy of I had the joy a few years after that of meeting a gentleman who just recently passed away by the name of Bob Chittister. And Bob Chittister was the guy who made Milton Friedman's Free to Choose series happen. And he told a story where he had also interviewed F.A. Hayek, and also big fan of F.A. Hayek. But Hayek, in his approach to all of this, said to Bob once, "It was like, if it could be proved to me that a socialist system was more effective in delivering wealth and prosperity and justice, then I'd be compelled to be in favor of it." And Friedman's answer to this was absolutely not. And I can't even really tell you why freedom, but freedom is my lodestar. The idea that individuals should be free to make choices for themselves about how to live their lives is the most important value to him. I think there are other values that get factored into that for me, from the perspective I come from Acton, that Acton comes from. But that was really, watching that series was what did it for me. And it's an interesting full circle for me as well, that if you remember the opening episode of that series, where does Milton Friedman go to demonstrate what markets in action look like? Hong Kong. And here we are now documenting what is unfortunately happening in Hong Kong, with this deprivation of freedom of not just people like Jimmy Lai, but other protesters and people who are fighting for their own freedom within that territory.
You know, I'm always struck by so many guests we have on this show, and every time we ask them about that call to liberty, so many of them always go back to Milton Friedman. Personally, I did the same, but I also have Thomas Sowell as part of my history.
For me, with Milton too, it is dispositional, right? You know, you can go on YouTube and watch those old episodes from the Donahue show, just how happy the man is to talk about these things that he believes in and how well he communicates it. I think we should all do our best to model that kind of disposition in the way that we make these arguments to our fellow citizens.
Yes, indeed.
Well, we are almost out of time, and I'd love to go on for another hour talking about Milton Friedman. Sadly, we don't have the time. But did you want to give any last messages? And maybe, James, can you pull up the website again real quick so people can see it?
I'd encourage people to check out acton.org. That's the organization's website. And if you want to learn more about the film, The Hong Konger, go to thehongkongermovie.com. That is where you'll find information about the film. You can watch the trailer. And when it's available for streaming, you'll be able to find out where you can stream it at that website as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Eric.
Thank you for having
me. Yes. And by the way, if you like this, we're going to have Eric on another podcast real soon to talk about some specifics on China. But thanks again so much for joining us, everybody. And until the next one, stay free.
Yes, indeed. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.